Carolyn.
Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our latest Wildlife Matters event. You're joining Cornwall Wildlife Trust, and this evening we're talking about our work with farmers, which we love doing, and we've been doing it for quite some time. And the team here in front of you are going to share some of their experiences, and we're even going to hear from an actual farmer himself, Stephen Bone, who you can see on the screen in front of you. Joining Stephen and myself, I'm Carolyn Cadman, Chief Executive of Cornwall Wildlife Trust. Joining Stephen and I, we've got Cheryl Marriott, who's our Head of Conservation at Cornwall Wildlife Trust, Daniel Poole, who is the Upstream Thinking Project Manager, and Liz Cox, who is the Upstream Thinking Ecologist. So you've got a top team with you tonight. And before we start, I should say thank you to South West Water, who provide much of the funding for our Upstream Thinking project, in fact, all of the funding for our Upstream Thinking project. So thank you very much to our colleagues at South West Water who enable us to do this important work with farmers. So as we go through this hours session, we're really looking for lots of interaction, and we'd really like your questions to come through. And I think I'm not sure whether left is left or right is right now, but on one side of the screen, you should be able to add questions into the chat box, and we'll keep an eye on those questions and ask the most pertinent questions as we go through. So to start with, I'm going to hand over to Cheryl Marriott, who is our Head of Conservation, as I said before, and she's going to say some things and share some information about why Cornwall Wildlife Trust is involved in giving farm advice. So Cheryl, over to you.
Thanks, Carolyn, and good evening, everybody. So Cornwall Wildlife Trust, we were formed as a charity almost 60 years ago, back in 1962, by local volunteers, and these are our founder members. And they were concerned about changes they were seeing in the countryside and the knock-on impacts of those changes on local wildlife. The reason I'm telling you that is I think it's the changes in farming happened all that time ago, and I think it's really important for us to realise why changes have happened. It was only 10 years before our founder members set up the trust that we were still in rationing in Britain after the food shortages of World War II. I wasn't around at that time, but I was speaking to my parents last night about it. And just by way of example, here's a piece of cheese. You'll see that. That was the weekly ration for one person. It's 2 ounces of cheese, which I also had to look up what 2 ounces meant, about 56 grams. So we had massive food shortages, and so the government set a target to increase food production by 60%. And farmers responded as they were asked, aided by mechanisation, artificial fertilisers, which were quite a new thing, pesticides, new breeds of livestock and crops. And there was this national shift away from the traditional mixed farms, that's farms that are growing crops and farming livestock, towards more specialisation. And we started to get a countryside which was much less varied. I won't talk any more about that, but there's a brilliant book that's out this year called English Pastoral by James Reed Banks, and that's got loads of information about that from the point of view of a farmer following 3 generations of a small Fellside farm in the Lake District. So that is a brilliant read to explain all about farm intensification and how we got to where we have. Anyway, the government policies worked. Food production went up, but as the founders of Cornwall Wildlife Trust had started to notice, it did come at a cost to the state of our soils, our rivers and our wildlife. And this isn't news to any of you, I'm sure. The harsh reality is that decline in nature continues. We've got a report out at the moment, the State of Nature Cornwall, and that shows that from 1994 to 2019, we've seen a 30% decline in farm and bird species, things like skylarks, Butterflies associated with farmland are decreasing, and sooner or later decline will lead to local extinction. It's not nice to think about or hear, but that is the reality of our situation. And this is significant for Cornwall because 3/4 of Cornwall is protected farmland. We've got nature reserves, of course, ones that we manage and others, and they're important core areas for wildlife, but they're nowhere near enough to stop the decline. So fundamentally, if we want to bring nature back to Cornwall, we must work with farmers to find ways that they can produce the food that we all depend on and take for granted in a way that allows wildlife to thrive. And there are lots of examples of farmers doing exactly that, with and without our help across Cornwall. We've worked with farmers for a long time. Previously, our advice focused on the wildlife-rich bits, those nice bits of habitat that were still there, so the downs and the woodlands, the heaths and the wetlands, that's where our expertise lay. So we'd advise on habitat management for those nice bits, or the bits we think of as the nice bits. We'd give recommendations, maybe naively, we'd kind of cross our fingers and hope that those landowners and farmers would have the time and the resource to carry those recommendations out. Then about 10 years ago, we had the opportunity to work with farmers on their more productive land. And we hired in farm advisors for this on contract because we didn't have the skills ourselves. But as that project went on, it became really clear that we needed to have the skills in-house to be able to help with the wildlife habitats, but also give reliable, sound, independent advice on the productive land as well. When I say independent, I mean that we're not selling seed or fertilizer or pesticide. We're independent of any sale. So the next chance I got for another funded project, the ones with South West Water, this was for an Environment Agency funded project in the East Lou Valley in Cornwall, and we employed a farm advisor rather than contract somebody in. We didn't get it right all the time. One example was one of our ecologists was working with the farmer and saying how wonderful the starlings were. And, they're a biodiversity action plan species, isn't that amazing? You've got so many. The farmer found them a real pain in the neck because they roosted on the barn. All the droppings from the starlings meant that he couldn't harvest the rainwater off that barn. So we looked a bit naive saying how wonderful the starlings were. So we learnt as we went along. Some of the farmers seemed quite nervous of us in those early days. It was almost like they expected us to tell them off. But that's not what we were there for. We weren't the wildlife police. We weren't there to judge. We were there to work together to improve the situation for wildlife. And many of the farmers, in fact, most of them took such pride in the wildlife that was on their farm. They just didn't have the time or the resource to do some of those tasks that we were asking them to do because they've got a list of jobs as long as your arm. And quite often an overdraft that would make your eyes water, I should think, as well. So we learned a lot about our approach to working with farmers. So then when South West Water approached us to work across a larger area down in West Cornwall, we then had the confidence to expand our farm advisor team. And it's those projects that we're going to hear a bit more about with the next speaker. Thanks, Carolyn.
Great, thank you, Cheryl. Now we're quite doing well in terms of time, so that's good. I can't see any questions new in the chat box myself, but if there are any, I'm sure the team behind the scenes will pop them into the document. So I think what we'll do next is move over to Daniel Poole, who is the Upstream Thinking Project Manager, and we'll hear from Daniel about what on earth is this Upstream Thinking Project and what is it, what does it do, and what's it all about? Over to you, Daniel.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And thanks everyone for turning up this evening. It's not that we can escape anywhere this evening, I know, but it's really nice that people are really engaged and interested to know what we're up to. I get to talk about the really positive stuff about the project that we're running called Upstream Thinking Project. And the Upstream Thinking program is one of the largest and most initiative, it's the word that I always struggle with, innovative? Anyway, it's the most impressive, ingenuitive conservation program in the UK in terms of catchment management. And it's been running for since 2016. The program itself, as everyone beforehand has mentioned, is spearheaded by South West Water. But the cool part about it, or one of the cool parts, is that it's spearheaded by 7 regional conservation organisations and a university. These are Cornwall Wildlife Trust, Devon Wildlife Trust, Farming and Wildlife Advisory Group, Southwest Peatland Partnership, West Country Rivers Trust, Southwest Lakes Trust, and the University of Exeter, who help bring us all the data, help us to bring all the data together so we can understand that what we're doing is right. This first map, I wanted to show you this so you can see the sheer scale of the program. So that's 18 catchments worth of farms and landowners, all working with environmental partners. Over the last 5 years of the project, the partners have worked with farmers managing over 70,000 hectares of farmland. So you can see it's an impressive figure. The second map, if I could get that pinged up, is our catchments. Cornwall Wildlife Trust work with the farming sector here in Cornwall in these 4 catchments. And from west to east, you've got, I'm trying to do this back to front so it looks right, the Drift catchment, Cobra catchment, Stithians, and College and Argyle. Cornwall Wildlife Trust has a brilliant team, as Cheryl has said, of farm advisors and ecologists, and also volunteer groups, and a water quality scientist who helps us keep on track and make sure that we're in the right areas. And we work with the landowners, we work with the farmers. That's the important part of this project, is that we work side by side, because we've got things to learn from the farmers, and hopefully the farmers have got things to learn from us. And the main aims of the project are reducing diffused agricultural runoff, which may carry things like nutrients, pesticides, soil, or things like that into the water with all the rain that we get. So that's no mean feat. Second one is improving catchment ability to hold on to the water for longer. This reduces flooding, it improves the flow of rivers and streams in dry summers. And the last one is the important one for us, although they are all interlinked, is improving wildlife on a landscape scale. So joining those wonderful reserves that Cheryl was talking about beforehand, those big bastions of buzzing wildlife, we need them all connected, interwoven to one another. So if there are any pressures due to climate change, wildlife and also all manners of species can actually move and react to that. And we can find that in the hedgerows and in the fields across Cornwall. So how does it work? Well, in Cornwall Wildlife Trust, we joined the program over 10 years ago, and it's now, as Cheryl was saying, in the early days, it was a case of cold calling farmers, trying to get them involved with our project, to open up that initial dialogue with the farmers in the catchments, who I'm sure probably saw us as a strange potential bedfellow. But 10 years on, we're now in a position where farmers outside of our catchments and across the southwest are coming to us asking for support based on recommendations of others. We've got 10 farm advisors and ecologists and water quality scientists within the team that work on this. So the next step is our farm advisors and ecologists will go out to visit the farm where they work with a farmer to create a whole farm plan with a whole business approach. So understanding the aspirations, challenges, the concerns of a farmer allows us to create a farm plan together to make sure that we not only benefit farm business, but also all the wildlife on the farm as well. And then this will get kind of nips and tucks as it goes along as the years unfold as well, because nothing is static in farming or in wildlife. Some of the things that we offer to the farmers, certainly within the catchments for the UST project, the Upstream Thinking Project, land management farm advice based on the current sustainable farming practices. We offer soil sampling and the interpretation, so farmers can understand where they need less input or more input, which inevitably ends up with some benefits to budget lines and also to the ecology in the soil. In the UST catchments, we can organise capital grants from a broad range of positive interventions like watercourse fencing to manure stores, which all greatly reduce the risk of unwanted sediments or runoff running into rivers by directly intercepting them on their paths. We're also really lucky to have a massive army of really willing, really abled volunteer groups who will go out to the farms, as was mentioned beforehand, and help manage the habitats on the farms. We know that the farmers are always under pressure for time, but this gives them the ability to manage the habitats that they happen to have on their land. We can also offer ecological surveys so the farmer understands what natural capital they have and how to improve it. And we can help with things like countryside stewarships and other agri-environmental schemes. So the important part of this is that we work alongside the farmer to help not add more pressure. We know that farmers on average are working 60-hour weeks. I know Stephen Bone was on a web call for 9 hours, all to do with farming. They're up against it time-wise to provide more food at a higher quality than ever before on the very same land that they had at the start. And that's all driven by markets and our shopping habits. So we want to take the pressure off where we can. And what's also really great is working alongside South West Water in a long-term program such as this, which goes in kind of 5-year increments. We've got that longevity, so we're able to build up these relationships and be there to support when needed. We're always at the end of the phone call. We're always at the end of the phone for a call, and we can revisit a farm umpteen times through the year just to make sure that everything's right. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing. So that's kind of how we do it in broad terms, but Liz and Stephen will talk about some more detailed stuff in a minute. But what have we achieved? So a couple of nice little highlights for you, and I could go on. But we've worked together now with over 200 farmers, which is really fantastic. We've brought over £2.5 million to the catchments that we work in. That's through countryside stewarships, through South West Water capital grants that they offer, environmental agency grants, and all of it is aimed at those three drivers, that the runoff, increased habitats, and trying to prepare the land to hold that water better. By the end of last year, we'd improved 180 hectares, or in old money, 444 acres. I didn't just work that in my head, I have written that down, of UK Biodiversity Action Plan, or BAT habitats, and a further 352 hectares, or 870 acres of important habitats such as wetlands, which don't have that BAT status. Our incredible volunteers have dedicated 3,686 volunteers days managing those habitats so species can thrive. We're now told that there's brown trout and spawning streams where they weren't before in our catchments. We've planted over 4,200 trees together. And a nice story is that over the last 5 years, we even reconnected a part of Cobra catchment stream called the Relief Stream back to the Cobra catchment. So now South West Water are able to draw fresh drinking water from it, whereas beforehand it was too clogged up with sediments or other types of pollution. So we've managed those habitats, we've worked with the farmers, and together we've brought more fresh water to South West Water. It's a huge positive and powerful collaboration between Cornwall Wildlife Trust, all the other partners that are involved, the farmers, South West Water, and I'd like to thank all of them who have gotten involved and that support us, including Cornwall Wildlife Trust supporters. Liz is one of our brilliant advisors who works on the UST project and will give us a bit more insight into the day-to-day work that we do at Cornwall Wildlife Trust and with the farmers. We're also lucky to have Stephen join us from Drift to give us his insights, and I'll hand over to Carolyn. But at any point, if you have any questions, then obviously please feel free to put them in the chat, or if you want to follow up on any of this, then the website that we have facing towards the farm relationship that we have is cornwallwildlifetrust.org.uk/farmers, where you can find out what we're up to. And it'd be nice to hear any comments, or if you have any other ideas or places where you'd like us to work in the future. Thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you, Daniel. Really good overview of all the good work that's been happening, not just by our team, all the volunteers, but by the landowners and farmers themselves who want to get involved in this initiative, which is great. Long may it continue. As I said earlier, it'd be really good if anyone does have any questions, pop them in the chat room. And also, if you're sat there at home watching us, let us know where you are in Cornwall or beyond. It's always good to see where people are watching us from, and we're all scattered across Cornwall, so yeah, it's good to get a sense of where people are watching from and the questions that you've got. So yeah, do use the chat room. Right, so I'm now going to hand over to Liz and Stephen to talk about the actual work that happens on the ground, and hear a bit more of a case study from a real life farmer.
Hi, so I'm Liz, as Daniel said, and I'm an ecologist for Upstream Thinking in 2 of our 4 catchments, both Drift and Ecological reservoirs catchment near Falmouth. I'd like to welcome Stephen, who everyone's mentioned, who's a dairy farmer in one of our Drift catchment. We've been working with Stephen since 2011. And Stephen, I thought I'd ask you first to just set the scene by telling everyone a little bit about how you farm and what your farm's like, please.
Hi everybody, good evening. Yeah, my name's Stephen Bone. Thought that the guys before me set the scene very well, really, in terms of where agriculture has come from and indeed where it is today. I am a dairy farmer, as Liz has just said. I milk 300 cows very near to Penzance. I keep about 850 head of stock, including followers and beef cattle from those dairy cows. And I cover an area of 1,100 acres, just over 400 hectares, primarily around the Madron area. And on that land, there's a large chunk of heathland, which we've been working with Cornwall Wildlife Trust on for a number of years. I also have a small solar array, and we would grow a couple of crops by winter barley and maize to feed the animals in the winter. The herd is an autumn calving herd, which means we would calve from the end of August until the beginning of December. And that's when the bulk of our milk is produced when the cows are housed in the winter, and the cows would go out to graze by day from as soon as conditions would allow in the spring, and by day and night when the weather warmed up. They're a bit like me. My cows are like me. They like to be in when it's bad weather, and they like to be out when it's good. Isn't quite always the case, but so that's predominantly how we do it. We are reasonably intensive. The annual average per cow is around about 9,200 litres. Our milk would be sold to Saputo, which would then manufacture my milk into Cathedral City and Davidstow cheese. So that's sort of me in a nutshell.
Great, thanks, Stephen. I like the analogy of you being like your cows, or your cows being like you. I think, Stephen, you and your farm are a really perfect example of how we try through Upstream Thinking to work with a whole farm. So you've got, a full productive dairy farm and plenty of productive farmland, and that's where the farm advisor on our Drift catchment team, that's Jan Dinsdale, that many people will know, that's where she comes and advises you on that side of things. And then you also have some pretty big and really pretty amazing areas of wildlife habitat as well, which is where I come in. Big areas of heathland, including part of an area where hen harriers come into roost in the winter. Spectacular wetlands with carnivorous plants, which I'm always harping on about to you because they're some of my favourites. Great range of species and also some really special historic sites. And like you say, we've been working with you for a number of years. When we first got in touch with you, I think in about 2011, you were just looking to go, well, you were just starting to go into high level stewardship, which was the government scheme at the time to fund management for wildlife on your areas of heathland. So that must have been quite a big change to start actively managing and grazing those wildlife habitats and start managing for wildlife alongside running a dairy farm. So can you give us a bit of an idea about how that felt when you started and maybe whether that feels any different now, how that might have changed?
It felt very different. If I had to be honest, I was very nervous about, I like the idea of going into the scheme. Obviously, you know, financially it benefits the farm and the business. But the thought of then actively managing these areas where I suppose if I drop back several decades, they were sort of managed as part of the farm, but in terms of effectively winter grazing for animals that were kept longer and older, the economics of farming drove it in a different direction, which meant that we had to make animals had to be more productive more quickly. So so effectively this land then sort of effectively drew in, I suppose you could say. It went from being grazed every winter to no grazing whatsoever, no animals, no management, and you know, quite honestly, you know, deteriorated, and it was land that was available for public access, but there wasn't much access available. So we bought some ruby reds, which should be Devon cattle, quite a hardy traditional breed. We fenced, which did cause controversy at the start. We put up gates. We then had obviously animals out on these heathlands, which again caused controversy. You know, some people didn't like the thought of having to have animals and having to share the space with animals. And I guess I had to prove it to myself, and I had to prove it to a lot of other people that it was the right thing to do. And here we are, virtually 10 years later. You know, I love my Devon cattle. They're the most. I'm just trying to think of the word really. Low maintenance animal I've got on the farm. They just get on with it and go out there and they graze. And to be honest, I'm quite proud of what we've achieved. You know, I went on a study tour to northern France where we looked at heathland management, and when I got back and looked at my heathland, it was rather embarrassing, really, and it especially was when they had the return trip and looked at my heathland and how little I'd done with it. So 10 years later, I look and we've, you know, through a program of controlled burning, grazing, bracken control, generally, you know, with sprays. We've really got that ground back to where it was, and you know, it is now a pleasure to go out there and look at the animals, because you can actually get out there and walk around and you know and see what's going on. I do smile when Liz turns up and tells me what new species she has found, and gets very excited, and I feel a little bit embarrassed that perhaps I don't share in the enthusiasm. But I am proud of if you know, that I know that is happening out there, and definitely it's driving wildlife and different species, and it feels good as a farmer that is happening.
That's great, and I know you love those plants, really, Stephen.
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say, you know, you mentioned you wanted to prove it to yourself and prove it to others, and like you say, there was a bit of controversy when fences and animals first went out. I'm just going to go through some of the things we've done with the project and with your farm over the last few years. But first, I just wanted to say, you mentioned being proud of your land. You know, you really should be. This summer, I spent a lot of time looking over those areas of rough lands, the heathland and the wetlands, and looking how they changed over the 10 years of the high level stewardship agreement you've been in. Now, just kind of headlines overall, the heathland there, like you say, there was a lot of bracken and a lot of scrub. The brackens reduced, well, way more than halved. The heathlands increased threefold, and the acid grassland has increased fivefold. So acid grassland and heathland, two really important habitats. The area of wetland remains the same. That's sort of typical because of how it's constrained geographically, but it's definitely really improved in quality. Those carnivorous plants I mentioned weren't anywhere to be seen before, and because they've been grazed and opened up by the cattle, that really has brought about quite a big change. So I just wanted to say, you know, you should be proud, and I'm really glad that you do enjoy going out there and seeing that, because that is a really big achievement, and it does prove that taking on those schemes and getting stock back out onto those moors is worth it and does make a big difference for wildlife. So I'm really pleased about that. Yeah, and so like I said, I've just been looking back on the things we've done over the years. I can see Daniel mentioned we could do lots of farm visits. We've been out to see you over 70 times since 2011. 15 in the last year. That's probably me mostly walking around your moorlands this summer. And that's not counting all the phone calls and emails, all that. All those visits will be, some of them will be Jan, so the farm advisory side of it rather than the ecology side, looking at soil tests, nutrient advice, talking to you about yard infrastructure. I know you're looking at capital grant with Jan about over-roofing a dung store at the moment. These are all things that can help protect watercourses from any runoff. You've also hosted some events for us, or allowed us to host them on your land. Some wildlife events for members of the public, and also volunteer tasks. We've been out quite a few times. We've led some farm-related soils and nutrients workshops on your land as well. I've been, as I said, coming out and reviewing your high-level stewardship agreements, so wildlife surveys. And now one of the things I'm really excited about as well, which is the latest thing I've been bugging you about, is hopefully the rewetting, looking at rewetting some of the areas of moorland and restoring the peatland in some of the mires. That's all really, really exciting. So we've done a number of things with you over the years, and I wonder if you could give us your thoughts on how you feel you and other farmers benefit from having a project like Upstream Thinking in your area.
Oh, yeah, massively. You know, I'm a firm believer that do what you do well, and don't take good advice, and in areas where you're weak, take good advice and work with people who know more than you do, and that's what I've sort of done with you guys in the Cornwall Wildlife Trust, especially you, Liz, and Jan. You know, my customers, in terms of the products they buy from me, i.e. milk or beef, and ultimately the retailer and the public demand that, that things have to change. And, soil sampling, for one, is a good indicator, where suddenly used to be this blanket strategy of applying fertilizer of certain indices across everything. And some of it might end up in the river. Some of it was useless because you already had a high indice in, where now we identify what fertilizers we need where. We don't waste, helps to reduce the wastage more than anything else, because ultimately if stuff like that is entering the river, one, it's no good to the environment, and two, it's absolutely no good to a farmer, because that's cash that's effectively waltzing off down the river. So yeah, that's been a huge sea change, really. And also, as farmers, we're faced with probably not, although it feels like a lot more water coming down from the skies, but actually there isn't. But when it does come down, it comes down quicker and harder than it used to. And where you guys have helped us in terms of trying to apply strategies where we help to retain that water, and because again, when water is running off the land at speed, it's taking a lot of nutrient that, one, we don't want in the rivers, and two, we want to keep on the land. So it's a double-edged sword, really, that we're trying to contend with. So yeah, for that part, 70 visits. Wow, I'm not like my Devon cows. I am high maintenance. But it is going back to that strategy of taking good advice. And you know, I'm always at the, I know the benefit of dealing with you guys is that actually, if quite honestly, Liz, if I pick up the phone to you and you're not sure of the answer, you ultimately will know somebody who does know the answer. You know, every year we abide under a number of different farm assurance schemes, whether they be to the people we sell our product to, or whether it be under, as most people recognize, the red tractor. And the whole environmental impact of agriculture is being ramped up, you know, as we speak, in terms of what our customer expects and, more importantly, demands from us. Mm-hmm. So, you know, we're on a real learning curve, and you know, the average farmer has needed to take good advice, and hopefully, I would have suggested that, especially in the drift area, which is the one where I obviously reside. You know, Cornwall Wildlife Trust are held in high esteem in what we've been able to achieve, and the infrastructure that they've signposted to farmers to help them achieve these results.
That's great, thank you. That's really lovely to hear, you know, and it is really great. I think one of these 70 visits we keep mentioning, I think that's one of the real strengths of the Upstream Thinking Project, is that we're funded to be able to go back again and again to people, to see the same farmers and build those relationships. And that's what really enables us to get to know people's farms and really affect some change on the ground. And I think both Cheryl and Dan referred to the fact that when we first started working in drift, so 10 years ago, you know, we'd never really worked with farmers before in that way. We didn't know what farmers would make of us. I can imagine probably people didn't necessarily think we had that much to offer to farmers, and we've come a really long way over the 10 years and learned a lot. And I think for me, and you alluded to several of these things, I think for me, one of the key lessons really is that it really is possible for farming and conservation sectors to work together. There's plenty of things we can advise on and support farmers with to make business sense to the farmer and bring wider benefits for wildlife and the environment. So you mentioned about, you know, nutrient advice and phosphate application, like you say, people putting on the same amount, but some of that could be wasted. You know, that's a cost to your farm business, and of course that's an environmental risk as well. Other examples, like I mentioned, talking about grant to roof over your dung store, that's the same thing. That dung's a farmyard manure as a resource on your farm, and if we cover it, you can make better use of it, and also it reduces the risk of that runoff. So I think that's very much what this whole initiative is about and why it works so well. It's about trying to find those win-win situations where we can all benefit and bring down those barriers, because we don't want to be, you know, we don't have to be on opposite sides, and we know that because we've been working together. And in drift we've been there 10 years. But I think I'm really proud to be involved in Upstream Thinking, and I'm really glad that our conservation work has moved that way. 10 years ago, like Cheryl said, we used to go out and advise just on wildlife, and that is great, but realistically, you know, we have to look at the wider farm business as well, and how we can support farmers to enable you to make those changes. So yes, so thank you, that's really lovely to hear. I wanted to ask you, well, we talked a bit about how farming is changing and more changes are coming. We're leaving the EU, obviously government payments are moving from being paid directly to farmers through something called basic payment, which I think you'd agree makes up quite a good proportion of a lot of farms' incomes, and it's going to be moving from that to a new system of public money for public goods. So things like more wildlife, flood alleviation, carbon storage. And I'm interested to hear you explain to us what you think that shift in those payments is likely to mean for the average livestock farmer.
I think it'll be a massive change. You know, we shouldn't underestimate, you know, the retail sector has really grown in this country based on the fact of providing food as cheaply. You know, it's a government policy to make sure there's plenty of cheap food out there. And that's probably come to the detriment of a lot of farmers' bottom lines, if I had to be honest with you. Support payments, the basic payment scheme that has worked for I don't know how many years now, but some considerable years, will over a number of years, as you just said, Liz, will disappear. I don't think we should underestimate the amount of food, whatever that is, that has been put on, supermarket shelves year after year because of that basic payment. That basic payment has subsidised a lot of food production. And what I mean by that is that many farms, that money has made a difference between profit and loss. So the core farming business has actually made a loss, but the basic direct payment has then enabled those guys to stay on the land and continue farming. So you take that dynamic out of the scenario, and then you don't need to be an expert to work out that suddenly there could be a lot of food production that suddenly is in a loss-making position because there is no support payment. So it's going to be. I don't profess to know exactly what. I don't think anybody really knows what Elms quite looks like yet. We're uncertain but what it will undoubtedly mean is that there will be far more work involved on an environmental basis to achieve some sort of level of government funding, and that actually might mean reducing stock levels, or potentially rewilding areas, or I've already got areas where it's low or no inputs whatsoever. Some of my land is currently there's a surveys going on in terms of SSSI, sites of special scientific interest, which also curtails inputs on in terms of farming and curtails the way you farm. So I think the farming sector, especially the livestock sector, is sitting there nervously wondering what this means to meat and milk production in the future. It could be. I'm not going to say catastrophic because that would be a negative. It could well be very much a positive, and we all might look back on it in several years' time and think that what a great idea that was. But we shouldn't underestimate that there's a hunger out there for cheap food, and that food will need to come from somewhere. And if it isn't coming from this country, it will have to come from somewhere where perhaps the assurances that we have to provide in terms of good livestock care, etc., cleanliness when it comes to production, are perhaps as adhered to quite to the level. But and let's not forget, Liz, that at the moment, as part of my farming business, I get to manage that wonderful piece of heathland up there around some special scientific sites, and that really does piggyback in terms of labour on the back of my core agricultural business. So I'm still of the mind that the cheapest way that the government can effectively manage these areas to the way in which the public would have a right to expect is to actually let farmers get on and do, to an extent, what they do in their core business to allow that to happen.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Liz. That was really, really interesting and covered a lot of ground. Whilst you two have been having your discussion, a lot of questions have come through. So I'm going to start moving through those questions, if that's okay. And what I'd ask of each of you who I'm going to direct a question to is to give a fairly succinct answer, if you can, so that we can get through quite a lot of them. And yes, Daniel, your eyebrows are raising because the first question is coming your way, Daniel, which is, this is a question from Maggie, who's asking, are you only working with farmers whose streams run into watercourses which people drink?
Yeah. Hello, Maggie. Yes, for the Upstream Thinking Project, we are only working within those catchments, those drinking water catchments. So everything within that drinking water catchment is our area. You'll find all those maps on the web page over on the Cornwall Wildlife Trust website. However, outside of that, we have farm advisors that work across Cornwall. And yeah, we're looking forward to helping with more farms in that manner.
Great, thank you, Daniel. A question that, let's ask Liz to answer this one. And this is a question from Emma. Liz, how often do you perform ecological monitoring on each farm? I just wondered if you had annual data collected which has been or can be analysed for trends or evidence of improving biodiversity, etc.
Okay. Hi, Emma. Yeah, the monitoring question is always quite a difficult one, because monitoring is something that takes up a lot of time. So that's what I've been doing on Stephen's land this year, is going back and trying to assess how each habitat has changed. Quite a lot of, I've started doing monitoring the last couple of years, and quite often I've had to do it from broad habitat assessments rather than specific data results. But now when I go out onto new sites, I collect data in a way that can be repeated through monitoring, because I've learned over the years that gives me much more useful results.
Brilliant, thank you, Liz. And Cheryl, I think this next question is coming your way, which is, have you found a knock-on effect of neighbouring farmers wanting to follow in the same way to improve wildlife on their farms?
Is that one for Stephen? Is Stephen neighbours joining in?
You might want to start and then maybe hand over to Stephen.
Okay. Well, certainly, I mean, we're getting more inquiries from farmers that we haven't worked with before, landowners, including some of the larger estates in Cornwall have been getting in touch and asking us to do work for them. So in that way, yeah, I was thinking about a farm level, but more generally, we are getting more requests. We're at a stage where we want to do more and more farm advice, but of course it has to be funded by somebody, either a funder like South West Water or the landowner or farmer themselves. So we'd like to do more. We're at a stage of growth. And we'll see what the new schemes bring and whether we'll be able to advise as part of a wider initiative for more farm advice. Sorry, you said succinct, so I'm going to be quiet.
Thank you, Cheryl, that's great. And Stephen, have you found your neighbours are getting interested in what you're doing and the sense of pride that Liz described in your land and the things that you're now proud of? Are your neighbours following your example?
Well, I'm not sure that they were following. I think they're certainly doing it. Yeah, I think we all sort of got on that same bandwagon in a sort of around about the same time, Carolyn. So short answer is yes. Yeah, they're on. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. The next question is from Jocelyn, who asks, in a Cornwall and Isles of Scilly local nature partnership meeting, Gain Consulting, who are a local consultancy company here in Cornwall, they'd been working on the lizard on an environmental land management scheme test and trial. They reported that farmers weren't interested in planting trees as there was little market for timber products. How do we overcome this and incentivise farmers to plant trees? Otherwise, the plan to plant trees in Cornwall to tackle climate change is unlikely to work. Who wants to, I expect you've all got views on this, but perhaps Liz, I know you've just recently featured in a video about planting.
I'm always going on about trees, aren't I? Yeah.
Go for it, Liz.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is timber production, but there is also other ways to bring in income from trees. So through some of the countryside stewardship grants, a lot of projects are starting to talk about carbon storage through trees as well. So I think it's unlikely to just be timber related, and hopefully through the Elms project, I mean, this is very much what we're all helping, but planting an area of trees, providing you're not planting it in an area that's already special for wildlife for something else, but planting an area of trees will deliver a lot of those public goods that those new elm funding would fund. So things like flood storage, carbon sequestration, and increasing biodiversity.
Oh, Carolyn's, oh, she's still there.
Yeah, I'm here. I just got a little 6-year-old just joined me and took me by surprise, so apologies. Do you want to say hello? You can pop up and say hello if you want to. Did anyone else have anything to add to Liz's answer on that question? Cheryl?
I'll just add a bit, yeah, because I think I heard that talk that Jocelyn's referring to. My impression was that was asking the question of farmers, do you want to give up ground for tree planting? And Stephen will tell me if I'm wrong, but I think farmers like to grow food. I wouldn't expect lots of farmers to be interested in handing over big tracts of land for tree growing. But there's agroforestry, that's a whole, you can plant trees in select locations, so you can still farm productively, but you get the benefits of shade, of slowing the flow of water, of producing forage.
He was on a roll as well.
Is on to farms. So I think it depends how you ask the question.
Great, thank you. The next question, Stephen, is for you from Oliver. Hi, Stephen. Have you ever thought about going organic? And Oliver is an organic mixed livestock farm over by St Austell.
Evening, Oliver. I hope your day's finished like mine. I have. I've considered it. Probably because of the layout. I'm to a degree. I've got 3 different units based over I'm sort of 2 miles from the south coast and 2 miles from the north coast, and there's 2.5 miles between the 3 units. So we're in a little bit of a bottleneck there, and the geography has dissuaded me, and also land area with a number of livestock I would have to pull that back. So I have in the past, and looking at the organic milk price, it's probably something I perhaps should have entertained a little more, but not at the moment, no.
Okay, thank you. We have another question which is asking about the independence of farm advice. There's a lot of discussion going on within Cornwall Wildlife Trust and with partners, Cornwall Council, and all the different people who are interested in achieving nature's recovery and tackling climate change, including our colleagues on the Local Enterprise Partnership and in other organisations who are coming at agriculture more from, or primarily from, I should say, an economic point of view and wanting to sustain a viable economic sector. And this question of independence of advice keeps coming up. And the question that's come up is again from Oliver, and it's to Daniel. And it says, if Cornwall achieves a farm advice service, which is currently being discussed between the Local Enterprise Partnership and the Local Nature Partnership, for which there is no funding identified at the moment, but it's an idea we'd like to pursue. If there is a single or a common farm advice service, would your advisors remain independent, or would it change things? What do you think, Daniel?
Yeah, it's a good question. So for us at the moment, to make sure, there's a few things to it. So to make sure that we're at an industry standard, so that we're standing shoulder to shoulder when it comes to the hard farm advice, we make sure that all of our farm advisors are certified with facts and basis, which are industry standard. We've got 10 years of experience. And like the last 2 things are, first of all, the advice that we're giving has to work for both farmer and for wildlife for us to want to go be involved. If we don't do it right for the farmers, if Liz gives the wrong advice to Stephen won't take the advice, or at this point he might do because Liz knows where he lives. But in general, the farmer may not take the advice because it just doesn't work for the business, at which point we haven't done our job. If we're 100% on the farm side and we don't give the wildlife point of view, then all of our staff will walk because that's what we're all here for. We're all here to make sure those 2 worlds connect. And I think that creates an independence. And the last point is that with elm coming around the corner, the environmental land management, I think it speaks to both sides. It needs to make sure that we can still put food on the plate, but it also needs to make sure that, that our wildlife is healthier, because the way we're going is dangerous for both parties. And again, this breeds that independence because we are all after the same thing. And I think at the end of the day, you can see what's written on the tin when you come to us. You know that we've got wildlife mainly at heart. We want to work with the farmers and make sure that it works for them too. So that's a longer than succinct, but I hope it got the message over.
That's a really good answer. Thank you, Daniel. And now it's time for just one comment, final comment from each panelist, please. And I'm going to start with Cheryl and then go to Daniel and Liz, and Stephen will finish with you if that's okay. So one final comment, maybe a recommendation to everyone who's watching as to something they can do if they want to help, or another final comment of your choice. Cheryl, over to you.
Thanks, that's easy if I'm first. I think buy as local as you can. If you're buying things produced locally, then you're buying seasonal by definition, and that's got to be a good start. Buy local and then it'll be seasonal. Let's start there.
Thank you. Very good. Liz, over to you.
I had several final thoughts, but I'll just pick one. I think just to say to people, if it's about something you can do, the wildlife trusts are a national body and other conservation organisations involved in discussions with the government about how these new land management schemes that will pay farmers to deliver the public goods. We're talking to them about how they'll be developed, looking at what it will fund and how much it can fund. And that's really critical to ensure there's enough support for farmers to make those changes feasible. So I think supporting us and other conservation organisations on any of these campaigns is a really important thing to do. Great,
thank you, Liz. And Daniel?
Liz stole my favourite one. I think the call to arms is brilliant there. But I'll say that we will have to inevitably, if we want to do the right thing, we're going to have to start thinking about paying more for healthier, more happier food. Voting with our feet. The market kind of dictates how farming is done at the moment. And if we can vote with our feet, as Cheryl said, then the government, the market will all catch up. And indeed, they're making big moves at the moment with the new environmental land management and trade deals. And all of that kind of, again, ties into lending your voice to petitions for making sure government spending is in the right place for farmers and farming sustainably, as well as the wildlife. So kind of keep your eyes peeled on our website and the farmers' website. That's just one thought.
It's all right. Thanks, Daniel. And Stephen, your final thought for us.
Thank you. All I'll say is I completely agree with what the panel just ended on with there. But what I'll say is, on a positive note, we hear a lot about the average age of the farmer and how bad it is. But actually, there's some great, fantastic young farmers now that are coming through in this area and in other areas that have really got their heads on and are really embracing what the public expects. And in terms of what they do with their land, in terms of environmental impact. So all I'll say to God, it's a continual theme. When you're buying these goods, just look to see where they come from, and absolutely agree with Daniel in that, chances are you're going to have to pay. If you want to see a great landscape out there, guys, you just might have to pay a few more pence for your shopping. That's all I'll leave you with.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stephen. And I suppose my final thought would be to let's look above the landscape out to sea and apply that same logic to what you're buying that's produced on land to what you're buying from the sea. And Cornwall Wildlife Trust has the Cornwall Good Seafood Guide, which takes all the landing data about fish that's coming in locally and recommends what you should be buying if you have Fishy Friday like we do in our family, look at the Cornwall Good Seafood Guide page and get that to help you take a decision about which whether to have hake or something else on Fishy Friday. But yes, buy local, buy your potatoes local as well as your fish. So that's my final thought, reflecting on everything. So all that remains to say really is to thank all the panelists for their brilliant insights and for spending their evening with us. So thank you, Daniel, Liz, Cheryl, and of course Stephen. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you to our members and our supporters for continuing to be loyal to Cornwall Wildlife Trust, particularly during COVID, which has been really challenging. And thank you, many of you will have seen that we had a fire on a nature reserve, Rose Nannon, 2 weeks ago now. And thank you to everyone who has supported that emergency campaign, which was quite overwhelming and very humbling. So thank you to everyone who got involved in that. You'll see on the screen in front of you that there's a few links for further information that's being posted up, where you can find out even more about our work with farmers and how you can get involved yourself in the Upstream Thinking Project. And finally, our next event, so our next online Wildlife Matters event is all about restoring Cornwall's scene, and that will be held on Thursday, the 25th of March at 7 o'clock, and you can sign up by the website, cornwallwildlifetrust.org.uk. So once again, thank you everyone. Thank you to Adam and Jodie behind the scenes as well, and have a good evening.
Thank you.